Hey everyone, Mark and Steve here.
Before we get started today, we want to let you know about Dare to Connect, our new online interactive video platform.
For less than the cost of a therapy session, you and your spouse get live access to both of us 3 times a week.
Each 30-minute live group support session provides interactive mentoring and healing for addicts, spouses, and couples.
If you're loving our podcast and our unique style of bringing you recovery, you're going to love Dare to Connect.
To learn more, go to daretoconnectnow.com. We're looking forward to seeing and working with you. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Hey everybody, Mark and Steve on PBSE with you. We're going to address a listener today who sent in a pretty, this is fairly common with what we see in our practices and people that we've worked with all over the world. This one is a little pretty specific though. It narrows in on some issues. I'm just going to read what this listener sent in and then Steve and I are going to address it.
Sounds like a plan.
So she says, hello. I've been listening to your podcast for the last couple months, and honestly, it's the only thing that has kept me sane during the navigation of my husband's porn addiction. During your podcast, you talk a lot about sexual boundaries and what your husband is thinking when he's wanting sex with you. But what about when your husband doesn't want contact with you? Even after he's gone through sobriety and is no longer acting out, or to the best of your knowledge, he's not. How do you handle the rejection that the wife feels when she is still lonely? I've been married for 25 years. We've been celibate for 15. I know a lot of that has been due to his porn use, and he's told me that he's sober now, and I do see great changes in areas such as not talking down to me anymore and a bigger commitment to God, but he still won't intimately touch me, even if I initiate. I feel rejected again. And I feel if I say something about this, I will trigger emotions of shame and inadequacy in him. I'm thankful for the changes in my husband, but would like my needs to be met as well. He suffers from ED and blames everything on that, but for years has been meeting his own needs through masturbation. Help me navigate this.
Oh, heart just goes out to this wife. This is a really hard situation. Wow.
Well, and then right out to both of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
This whole thing is, we see this so much, and some of these things, you and I experienced in our own marriages and recovery journey. Now, as we start to try to address some of this and make some comments, please understand this is a very specialized situation. There are a lot of details we do not have.
Yes.
So we're going to try our best to try to address a lot of this, but please know we're not giving therapy advice. We're not trying to say we have the be all end all solutions for this because, again, very complicated, but we will give it our best shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's jump in on this.
Let's do. So yeah, right out the gate, because I know these podcasts, they go fast, but looking at this, I think the first thing to do is rule out what you can, when it comes to factors that could be playing a role here that operate outside of like the therapy realm. Okay. So biology is going to be important here. Now we have no idea how old this couple is. They do say that they've been married 25 years. So if they were married in their early to mid 20s, that's going to put them at least in their 50s. Biology is a critical one here. And I've talked about before on this podcast how, we see this with guys that we work with fairly frequently in marriages who are in similar situations where when addiction has been a factor for an extended period of time, right? To the point where it's been ongoing, this distorted sexuality and distorted sexual relationship this compulsive sexuality has been going on for, the entire, if not the majority of the marriage over the course of years and decades, like I guess is the case here, it's very, very difficult to even for both the addict and a spouse to even have a grasp of what would be or could be normal at this point. And we're going to talk about how to address that on the emotional and actually fixing it realm. But the first place you're going to want to start is definitely just with the biology side, and recognizing that you have to take that into account when you look at, where could some of these things be coming from. It's very common in Mark and I's practice when we look at this stuff too, and this is where we usually start in situations like this. It's very common, for example, low testosterone to be playing a role in something like this.
Very much.
There are lots of telltale signs for low testosterone: decreased energy, inability to get up quicker in the morning. Oftentimes depression or emotional symptoms can accompany that. Lethargic. I mean, there's a whole list of things. Oftentimes those are kind of mimicked by being an addiction or a depressive state anyway. And so going and having testosterone levels checked, as well as like a thyroid, that's something that Mark and I would recommend.
Yep. Thyroid levels.
Anybody.
There could be heart issues, cardiovascular issues.
Yes. All sorts of stuff.
Going and making sure that it's, what is the biology and is there something that's contributing or causing this from that standpoint? Absolutely. Right. Eliminate the easiest to go get tested first.
For sure.
Now, the other side of this is what we often talk about on this podcast about what's called the arousal template.
Yeah.
The sexual wiring inside of my brain and body that basically determines what turns me on sexually, how I function or don't function sexually, right? What kinds of ideas and practices and attitudes and coming at this have I developed over my lifetime? That has a huge impact on what this gal is describing. Yeah. And that arousal template, that sexual wiring inside of me can become distorted in so many ways, right? So let's take for an example, I don't know how old this guy is, but let's say that he's 50, just for example's sake. And let's say that, like a lot of my clients, and this was the case for me as well, let's say that he started in his addiction at a very young age. I have clients where, for many reasons, it was, family introduced it, peers, situations, or whatever, they began masturbating even at ages as young as 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And so let's say that, for example, this was the case with him. This could be a guy who's been developing and deeply entrenching and deeply rutting his arousal template within himself for almost a half a century. Yes. Right? Think of the ramifications of that. I mean, that is just, you can't begin to fathom what that does. And now, let's say at age 50, he's trying to be healthy. You're going to be dealing with that lifetime of sexual wiring about, what arouses me, what doesn't, what turns me on, what kind of fantasies have been playing in my head, right? How does all this work? What was modeled to me or not modeled to me as I was growing up? What were prior sexual experiences I had before my marriage, and then all the 25 years of marriage. I mean, that is a big, big deal.
No, you're absolutely right. And along with the arousal template, it should be noted, the arousal template essentially is, what turns us on, right? What excites us, what drives us, what is the mapping of our libido look like? But when you're dealing with a situation where this has been going on for as long as it hasn't, as is the case with most of the compulsive guys that we work with, it isn't just a what turns me on that becomes distorted. It's the end goal in the brain of what the benefits are, the perceived payoffs, right, of a sexual release, and what should be leading up to that, right? So the things that drive that. Yes. So, for example, distortions around the connective nature of sex versus an escapist nature of sex, right? In what ways has my brain been trained to utilize sex for? Is it a way to express connection with another person? Or it could be anything from that, which would be oscillating more towards the healthy in our world, all the way up to, an escapist mentality, or even a traumatic repetition from trauma in the past. I mean, there's a whole range of things, right? I mean, we're talking a minimum of 25 years of addiction that's been going on here, and probably far longer.
Yeah. So in my brain, in my body, does sexual climax mean escape from stress? when life gets difficult? Have I used it as a shame coping mechanism so that I feel that I have worth and value? Have I used it for insomnia? I can't sleep, and in order to sleep, I use climax as the way to get to sleep. Right? There are 1,000 things that I could have attached to that reward system of sexual climax,
especially over that period of time.
And it literally becomes not just something I do; it's something I am. Like my body literally says, I cannot function without this climactic experience attached to these things.
So in other words, it's not just a question of arousal. It's also a question of sexual cues as well.
Yes.
Right. What are the cues? What are the emotional triggers? Not just the drive itself that's become distorted. It's how has my brain become accustomed to utilizing a sexual release?
Exactly.
And so there's that whole element. So that's a whole like 5 podcasts. Right,
it is there, 5 podcasts. Yeah, exactly. So if we look at all that, and we could go on and on and on about all the ways that this guy's been rewired and all the things that happen, but that all comes down to the fact that there is a need for establishing now, probably for the first time ever, healthy sexual norms.
Yes.
What does that even look like, feel like, be like inside of me, in my partnership, right? I mean, I know in my own recovery, I had no idea if you'd asked me, so Mark, tell me what is truly healthy sexually for yourself and as a partnership. What does that look like? What is the sexual norm, Mark? I couldn't have told you in a million years.
Yeah.
I had no
absolutely.
idea.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad that you mentioned the partner too, because we probably should have covered that before, right? This isn't just something that's been going on for 25 years for the quote unquote addict, right? We're talking about if the partner that wrote to us, if she, for example, was celibate prior to the marriage, and this say was her only sexual relationship or has been her only sexual relationship, right? Norms around sexuality are going to be for different reasons just as distorted for her. Right. And what this looks like and how it's supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to look, right, versus not. And those are really hard questions to answer from a whole slew of different places. And so this sexual norms component isn't just about him kind of remapping, what is attractive, what is not, what is healthy, what is not. It's going to be very much the same thing for her.
Yes.
And what does a healthy, just sexual relationship in general look like on my end? What should I be looking to for sex to signify versus not? Right. So in other words, if I am looking to sex to validate me in certain ways in a relationship, but for my partner, it's strictly an escapist behavior, you can see where the wires are going to get crossed in just a dynamic like that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got one spouse who's perpetually caught in a place of never feeling validated, and the other one never even looking at it as a source for validation or safety, but rather as a way to just escape and numb out.
Well, and as we read this, married for 25 years and celibate for 15, which we take to mean they haven't had sexual relations in their marriage for 15 years. Mm-hmm. And we add that into this mix and all the other things we've talked about. One of the things, Steve, that we talk about the need for a professional in this process. And there's one professional recommendation that we come at with caution, right? This concept of a certified sex therapist. Mm-hmm. As we even make that recommendation, obviously this listener mentioned there is a big God component in their lives, but this is a situation where someone who is a certified sex therapist, couples therapist who specializes in that area could be very helpful. If you're going to seek somebody like that, just make sure that they have your same value system in place, that they have a strong religious or Christian component, and you can check reviews and make sure that that is the case. But that could be a very important part of this process.
Absolutely. Mark and I, for example, I'm a certified sex addiction therapist, and we do a lot of this type of work in our offices to a degree, but we are big believers of operating within your scope of practice. And when you're talking about a rewiring for a couple that's dealing with this kind of dynamic for this length of time, right, on this level of significance. And obviously we don't know the whole story here. It is something realistically you're going to want to look at considering. Yeah, sure. Obviously we have to have recovery ducks lined up in a row. And we've got to have him operating from a healthy place and doing his own work. And you both have to be doing your own individual work. And we're going to talk about that in a second as well. But assuming that all those other things are in place, having a third party who is really skilled and specialized and being able to do this and help you to navigate a new level of sexuality, and someone who can do that within your religious or moral framework would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that would definitely be something we would recommend. And then as we start to get into, what you can do within the scope of getting professional help, but obviously as part of that, you're going to be doing your work. I would really encourage, this gal who wrote into us to realize this is not all about her.
Yes.
And boy, is it easy
sure.
when you're being rejected like this, for various reasons. It'd be very easy to take this extremely personal and say, this must be, I'm inadequate. I'm not measuring up. There's something wrong with me. I'm not attractive. I'm not skilled. I'm not whatever. It could be very easy to take all this on your shoulders. It's very important for her to allow him to own his own stuff.
Yes.
Right. To work his own recovery. Because she says something really important here. She says, I don't want to bring this up because I'm really afraid that if I do, that it's going to trigger his shame and his inadequacy, which what I hear when she says that is, I'm going to be the cause of him relapsing if I even tried to navigate this topic of him not being sexually responsive at all.
Rule number one for a spouse in recovery, and for an addict for that matter in recovery, is that we own our own stuff, right? And then we allow our partners to own theirs. And you can't own that any more than he can own your recovery, right? At the end of the day, you fixing you is your business, just like him fixing him is his. Emotionally managing a partner, Mark and I, we talk about this often, but we just, neither one of us, we discuss this frequently. We've never seen an example where in the long term, trying to emotionally manage or protect another person through withholding information, it just never pays dividends. There is a time and place for those things. It's true. And there's a tact and a way to navigate that. But at the end of the day, the more I try to run my partner's recovery and show, the more I'm actually going to prolong and delay the process.
So what that means in this case, for example, yes, could you bringing this up trigger shame and inadequacy in him? Almost sure.
Probably will.
But it's his job to go and seek his support and resources and systems so that he can start to gain resiliency with regard to those issues. So that when you do so that when you do bring it up, he has tools and skills and is working through his shame and inadequacy. But I'm going to take it one step further. He needs to go do his own work so that he can bring this up.
Yes.
So that he can proactively begin to tackle this and be healthy enough to do so. So it's really important that he do his work for that reason.
Absolutely.
And then for her, she needs to also be doing her own work, because this can be obviously very shaming and very emotionally traumatic for her. Right. And so what is her system of support in all of this?
Well, and that is, that's an important piece of this, because of the secrecy and the shame dynamic accompanying the issues that we talk about here on this podcast all the time. It's extremely common for clients that we work with to become myopic in their viewpoint for different reasons. If a wife finds herself emotionally isolated, she's not talking to or opening up to people in general, but specifically people who are experiencing the same thing. It's very easy to develop a mentality of, you only know what you know, and to kind of become trapped and start forming your own realities around ideas and concepts in this process that may not be realistic. Mm-hmm. And so you have to bring in outside sources, and some of those can and ought to be professional. Right. We've already talked about a couples therapist, good sex therapist. A good individual therapist would be somebody to strongly consider. But it does extend well beyond that, because even the best therapists, Mark and I are kind of unique in this way, because we have and are very open about our experiences navigating this, which we share with clients, but that's probably less common than is typical. You're going to really need to be, and even if you found a therapist that did that, surrounding yourself with a group of people who are in the same position and navigating the same issues, to be able to access their experience, what's working for them, what's not, to be able to get understanding and validation from a group of women in this case who really get it, because this is one of those situations where I think it's really hard to get it unless you've been there. To say nothing of the 12-step program itself, which is a common place to find this, is going to be invaluable. So good 12-step groups like Essanon, for example, which is a support group for partners and families of sex addicts, would be invaluable here. My wife is a huge proponent of this. She has attended fellowships like that for years and continues to do so, as do I. And so those can be huge. And I would say that in a situation like this, you definitely need that. One of those, we're kind of picking up from this, that it's a kind of a conservative Christian dynamic going on here in this relationship. And what's very common when we work with conservative Christian cultures is there is this huge hesitancy and taboo around sex, especially with this generation that we're referring to. And we've got to kind of break down some of those walls if you're really, I think, going to make good progress, because that secrecy, that taboo, it is responsible for so much of the holding back that just is frankly very avoidable if we are able to bring other people and resources in.
Yeah. And so to kind of finish up, there's one other area that we should talk about quickly, and that is, and this is really hard for people to get their arms around, especially when you've been married, for example, 25 years. We talk about this concept of, are you willing and open and ready to literally start from scratch, to begin at the beginning when it comes to your sexual and your emotional relationship?
Yeah.
Right? Because we're talking about, you've been in marriage 1.0. Now are you ready to go to marriage 2.0? Mm-hmm. And it's funny, when I do this, sometimes I'll work with couples who, couples in their fifth, even I've got a coupleship I've been working with who are in their 60s. And we're talking about literally going back to the beginning, because they have many of these same scenarios this gal's bringing up, but going back to the beginning, even with their courtship, right? Like, go back to the beginning and start dating each other, right? And so we started step one, we held hands. We go to step two, we intertwine fingers. Mm-hmm. You start talking about this, and people in their 60s will look at you like, what do you think, we're in junior high? And I'll say, in some ways, you are. In some ways, we literally need to look at each other and say, can we start over?
Yeah.
And it literally, because there's been so much that's been miswired and dysfunctional, and it wasn't modeled proper to us, and we got off on so many bad tracks. Sometimes we just have got to try to go back to the beginning. Now, that doesn't mean in any way that 25 years of marriage is wasted, or we have to pretend like that didn't happen. Actually, the fact that you've been through what you've been through is incredibly invaluable in the fact that you can now even attempt this.
Yes.
That history is enormous of what you've been through together.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We really do have so much empathy for this couple and for all of our listeners. We know that so many of you are in difficult spots with this and facing huge challenges like this. We love the fact that you come here each week to get support. We do offer more in-depth levels of support and discussion. And, we were talking about a support system before. I can't think of, frankly, few better places to find that kind of support in an anonymous, confidential setting than our program, Dare to Connect. We meet 3 times a week on there with addict spouses and couples, specifically one for each group, for each of those dynamics. And, one of the coolest parts of that program is not just having Mark and I's ugly mugs up there talking about different concepts and addressing questions and issues, although we'd like to think that's valuable. One of the biggest parts to that so many people are finding, today, this morning's group, for example, was for addicts. And, I would say that for the typical norm, if you take a group of guys who struggle with shame and other issues like that, you put them in a room at the beginning, to say that they're quiet and that they don't open up would be the world's greatest understatement. We couldn't keep up with all the comments in there today. And it was guys going back and forth, supporting each other, talking about what's working for them as they were sharing problems and issues. Mark and I got to about 20% of it. The other 80%, they were discussing amongst themselves and associating a confidential environment that lets them ask questions, get answers, get that support from other people in addition to the professional support. So we would love to see you over there. You can snag a 2-week free trial of that and give it a try at daretoconnectnow.com. Please come and visit over there. But we really do care about each of you and appreciate you coming to the podcast and for fighting the fight that you fight. please do keep working at it. Connection is the key to this process, and getting help and taking it a day at a time. That's really where the magic happens with this. You don't have to be, everything in a relationship doesn't have to be fixed tomorrow for you to be in a good place in a relationship. You just have to be moving that way. And that's one thing that encourages me about these two, is it sounds like we've got two people who want to make it work.
Yeah.
And if that is in fact the case, then we have all the hope in the world for you guys, because as long as both of you are in that space and willing to do the hard work and do what it takes, miracles really do happen in this process.
Couldn't agree more. All right, everybody. We will see you next time on PBSE, and keep on keeping on.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants, and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.